On mic today, we have Zoe Plait. How are you doing this fine evening?
I am doing well. Exhausted, but well.
I'm sorry. You had a busy day so far?
Oh, it's a good exhausted. I've been traveling.
Oh, I love travel.
Yeah.
Where have you been?
Been to San Francisco and then Minneapolis.
Ah,
So it's been quite a week.
I would imagine that's quite a round trip you had there.
Yeah.
Well, you have a blog on which you've written extensively about a couple of different subjects, and you have worked with promoting the MST3K live tour. That's quite a range of experience.
Yeah. So just to specify, there are like three different live tours going on. There's the official MST3K live tour with
Mhm,
Joel. There's the occasional live show that RiffTrax will stage
mhm,
in Nashville. And then there's the Mads are back, which is specifically Trace Beaulieu and Frank Conniff. And
mhm.
those are the two guys who I worked with.
Okay. Thank you for clearing that up because I have not been able to see the Mads Are Back or the MST3K live tour.
Mm,
I was a huge fan of Cinematic Titanic back in the day.
yes,
I,
absolutely.
I saw that show probably 8 or 9 times while they were touring, so fond
Really?
memories of that. Yeah.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. I wish I
it,
could have seen it that many times too.
yeah, it got to the point where I would show up at the table at the end of the show and they'd be like, "Oh, Aaron's back. Hey,
Well, they're
how would
really
you?"
friendly guys, so
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. The first time they were in, I want to say it was Dallas. There was this little blurb on the internet where Trace had said, "Hey, we're going to have a meet and greet before the show at this little video store," and it was just this little hole in the wall mom and pop video store,
Yeah.
and it was like I couldn't find the blurb after that. I read it once, and I'm like, I'm going to find this, and just when I'm starting to think of maybe I just got pulled on a hoax, I hear Crow's voice say, "Hey, everybody!"
Oh man, that's like a dream come true.
It really was.
Yeah, totally. And this was before Cinematic Titanic, you said?
This was for Cinematic Titanic.
Oh,
This was
okay.
one of the
Gotcha.
first 2 or 3 shows they did.
Oh yeah, I bet they were just picking up steam and so the people who knew about them were limited enough that they could afford to find a hole in the wall. When I
Hmm.
saw them, it was in 2013 at the Castro Theater in San Francisco, and they were so popular that the guys were like, nicely trying to shuffle people along and get everybody through the line. They were just overwhelmed with people. They were
Oh,
so excited.
it's a good problem to have, but yeah, I can't
Yeah.
imagine being in that situation. So could you compare the other shows you're doing to what you were seeing those years ago?
Oh, definitely. I would say that the shows that I have worked with for Trace and Frank specifically have been a lot more kind of I don't know, familiar, friendly, not friend. That's implying Cinematic Titanic's not friendly, but Trace and Frank have been very like smaller audiences who get more time to talk to the guys when the show's all done.
Hmm.
So it's a little bit more just familiar.
Hmm.
And that's been awesome because one thing I've found with the MST3K community is that they are very intent on getting to know their heroes from the TV show because those heroes from the TV show were always so accessible feeling.
Hmm.
They feel like your best friend, and that's why you want to watch the movie with them.
Hmm.
So that the fact that Trace and Frank have been able to get people more time to ask questions and just mill about the lobby while they were signing autographs and stuff, that was amazing. And it
That
has been
makes
amazing.
that makes a lot of sense. And I'm just thinking if you go back to the original run of MST3K, a good chunk of it was like the midnight showings were the big thing. And most people don't watch those with their family. They watch it after work or before they go in for the morning shift. And it's like those are your friend movie watching friends there. You don't have anybody else at midnight to watch with.
Yeah, and you don't really have to because you've got the company of the people in the theater seats. It's very
Hmm.
charming. To me, Mystery Science Theater is a lot like a lullaby in that you feel safe with these people near you and you feel relaxed, and so you're able to just drift off to sleep to the sound of a terrible, terrible movie in the background.
That is one of the best ways I've ever heard the show described. So I definitely have to write that down before I forget it.
That's
Uh,
awesome. Yeah.
so if you were to, I would also say that when I would see people at Cinematic Titanic, that was a time I could actually just greet people, walk up to them, strike up a conversation, and I'd say goodbye by saying, "Watch out for snakes."
Yes.
And they always get it.
You know, I gotta tell you, sometime back, I was with a guy for some amount of time, and when we broke up, the last thing he said to me, very amicably, he said, "Watch out for snakes." It was the very last thing he said to me, because that's how core this is to my character. That's how important it is to watch out for snakes. But it's so easy to get those taglines from the show and then use them to like a clarion call for other fans.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can just do this, the AOK symbol to any Misty, and they'll go, "It stinks," and they know what that means.
Yes,
And
they do.
from a psychology standpoint, you and this stranger that you've just encountered immediately have something deeply in common,
Mm-hmm.
because it stinks doesn't just mean that you've both seen experiment number 303 Pod People, in my nerd voice. That's it doesn't just mean you've seen that episode. It means you've seen at least most of them, and you've connected on that point. It's awesome.
And it's one of those moments where the absurdity of the movie and the bad writing, the bad acting, the bad whatever have you, it transcends that, and it just becomes a moment of, like, when you would hear say, "I don't care," or "We like it very much." It's like,
We
that
like
just,
it very much. Yeah.
how many "we like it very much" moments do you have in your day-to-day life? I would say at least once a day. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, just forget you. We like it very much.
I think for everybody, the line of choice is a little bit different. For me, when I'm driving, for example, I always think, "Well, pass if you're gonna."
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a little throwaway line. I think it's Joel who says that one. He just throws it away in a movie, but it stuck with me. And something about these lines, these jokes from the show, are just so perfectly concise and so well delivered that they stick in your head.
In college, that was time we were all discovering MST3K the movie, because it didn't have a wide release. I kind of rolled around, and you really discovered it on video most likely. And the line at the beginning when they're getting into the van and the Jeep, it's like, "Weenie Man away!" The running gag would be every time somebody would leave the dinner table, just before they would round the door, "Weenie Man away!"
Oh, that's wonderful.
I know.
Oh my gosh.
And again, you can just adopt that into your life here and there.
Yeah, and it's funny how specific some of those lines get to be. Like, there's another line from the movie. "Yeah, and if my hands were made of metal, that would mean something."
Mm-hmm.
That just out of context, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's very specific. But there have been a couple times in my life when I actually have gotten to use that line, and it's so validating and rewarding, even if nobody around me knows what the hell I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. And they probably won't, and that's okay.
Because the right people will get this.
Yes, I call that the Joel Robinson principle.
Oh, that's funny.
He had I'm going to butcher this, but when they were writing the show, people would often say to Joel, "Do you want to make this joke because it's a really weird, obscure joke that nobody's going to get?" And he would say, "The right people will get it."
Yeah.
And that's become my mantra for when people would come up to me and talk about podcasting or science fiction or writing or whatever they're passionate about. They're like, "I don't know if I want to do this because nobody's going to get it." And I will just say, the right people will get it. We had a couple talks about, my previous guest was a podcaster, a big one. We'll get to that later. But I would make the point that there are 7 billion people on this planet. It doesn't matter if 98% don't get it. The chunk that do get it is huge.
Huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's funny. I call it the Joel Hodgson principle, but I guess it's one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that interview where he said that, it was in 1992. This is MST3K, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was the name of the little mini doc that Penn Jillette hosted for Comedy Central.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I see that little section of that documentary where he says, "We never ask ourselves who's going to get this. We always say the right people will get this."
Okay.
It gives me chills every damn time. I love it. I live my life that way.
And see, now I knew I had that in my head from somewhere, and you just told me what special it was. So I will have to go back and find that again and rewatch it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to help.
So you also write about MST3K on your blog as well.
I do. Yeah, it's an interesting little collection of stories. When I was working with the Mads, I would often travel with them. So I got to go on several excursions over the 18 months or so that I was with them. And they were all amazing. They were just beautiful, fantastic opportunities to get to know my heroes as people instead of just putting them up on a pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've written down some of the more memorable instances over the past few years that I've been able to spend time with them. And I've got a ton more in my back pocket. I just haven't put them down on paper yet.
I strongly encourage you to do that, because that's what you're looking at there is essentially the journal of a true fan on their journey deeper and deeper into creativity. Basically, you don't know what's going to come from that, and I'm not going to suggest to guess for that, but don't let that go. Definitely write that down.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's I've got plans. I've got plans.
Okay, cool.
I definitely want to write a more official book about Mystery
Mm-hmm.
Science Theater. I don't know what angle it's going to take yet. On one hand, I could do sort of a biography of the show and stick to
Mm-hmm.
the facts, or I could do more of a book on an op-ed,
Mm-hmm.
like my opinions about the show and my experiences as a fan. Or maybe I could combine them. I'm not sure. But either way, a book is coming. And actually, I have considered calling it "The Right People Will Get This" as the title of the book.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. I think it's due. It's just long past due. People have written all of these essays and interesting academic articles about, the philosophy or the psychology or the media interaction of MST3K, but
Mm-hmm.
nobody's like written down the extensive history of how the show happened.
Mm-hmm.
I want to do that.
You absolutely should. I mean, it's out there. If the original episode guide and MST3Kinfo.com, the Usenet archives, the information is there, but it is so scattered to the four winds, and it needs somebody like you to put it together while it's still somewhat intelligible before we lose it to the decades. Do
Right.
that.
Exactly. Like I mourn the loss of whatever was taped that just hasn't made it onto digital, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And before something like that happens again, where our media gets phased out in exchange for a newer technology and we lose more information, I
Mm-hmm.
want to get it all together, just like you're saying. And I also want to add the spin of being somebody who was kind of on the inside
Mm-hmm.
or is kind of on the inside and who knows
Mm-hmm.
these guys. Because I think if somebody approached a book project about the history of MST3K, but they really had no access to the people who made the show,
Mm-hmm.
the scope of their book would be very limited.
Indeed.
So I think I can bring sort of a personal touch.
And having read the books, Joel's book, not Joel's, Mike's book, Kevin's
Hmm.
book, the MST3K guide, I mean, you can tell that these people worked very well together. It was an extremely close-knit group of people. There was a lot of in-jokes. There was a lot of inside humor, stories that probably only they get. That is something that somebody like you needs to grab and put into words, because nobody else is going to get that just from reading show notes.
Right, exactly. I think that there are layers upon layers of takeaway
Hmm.
of like lessons to be learned from what we're seeing unfold in this mystery science universe. And I think that as somebody who has studied psychology and just as somebody who's extremely introverted and likes to sit and just think about, robot puppets for hours at a time by herself, I'm a candidate for writing that story. And I'm kind of releasing, those layers of psychology and in jokes and history and everything that's kind of not quite put in one volume yet.
Hmm.
I want to be the person to do that.
So you're going to talk about the fan journey. Let's talk about your journey. How did you find the show?
Well, um, okay, TLDR, because we don't have another 8 years to go into it, unfortunately. That's how long I've been a fan. Um, I grew up with pretty severe chronic depression, and I found myself kind of distancing myself from humanity. I felt like nobody really understood me. Nobody knew how to make me smile. All of these terrible aspects of clinical depression. And then, out of nowhere, A man in a red jumpsuit and his stupid robots made me laugh. And it was just one instance. The episode was Teenagers from Outer Space. And oddly enough, I remember it was October of my sophomore year of high school. And I woke up the next morning after watching that episode, and I just felt different and better. And I realized very slowly that I had come to like connect with these people I had seen on screen. I had come to admire them, to enjoy them, and to feel kind of comforted by them. You know, they made me laugh, and that is an impossible thing when you're depressed. So that was a small miracle that I pursued. You know, I got to know more of the show. I irritated the hell out of my friends talking about it. I got to know the creators over time, and I just kind of took that one little spark of joy that this thing brought me amidst all the darkness, and I followed it, and I found lots of friendship and lots of community and lots of laughter.
That makes a lot of sense. Because when I said that your blog hits a broad range of topics, at first glance, writing about MST3K and writing about depression don't seem to click, that, and it doesn't seem to be a natural blending of topics. But when you look at it as the fact that one influenced your appreciation for the other, suddenly it makes a heck of a lot of sense. And please don't think that you're the only person who had to take that journey there, because
No.
One thing we found doing the show, and the reason I started doing the show, is that fandom helps people in a lot of ways. Number one, it gives them something to help them deal with the real stuff in life. The fact that you can find a show about puppets and monsters and aliens and use that as just your I don't want to use the word crutch, because that is not, but it is your shield. It is something to give you control over that aspect of your life. It is something to help you find a better path forward. That's really special.
I could not agree more. And I think that the idea that the right people will get this applies perfectly to this situation where you take a fandom about something initially silly, and then you extract from it something really meaningful. Because there are majorities of people out there who, if I tried to explain this, especially if they haven't seen the show, they'd go, wait, what? So you have borderline personality disorder, and you think you were saved by pieces of plastic that were being voiced by guys in their 60s? Like, yeah, well, when you say it that way, it makes no sense. But the way you just put it, that reaches people. Because there are a lot of people out there who have very similar stories to mine.
And let's look at it this way, because somebody could come up to you and say, you're dealing with major depression.
Sure.
You need therapy, you need drugs, you need whatever you need. I mean, people can talk to you and say, this is what you need to get better, and they're helping you. But at the same time, if you can say, hey, I have this problem, but I'm looking at this TV show and it's about, watching Japanese monster movies and these puppets make jokes over it, but you're seeing a guy who has no human contact. He's in the middle of nowhere. This could be the worst. This could drive him to suicide if this was an actual human being in a real situation. But what does he do? He builds friends who actually have personalities of their own. I mean, he doesn't build like Me Too ass kissers. He builds people who make fun of him. And why would he do that? Because that's what friends do. Friends sometimes are jerks, but they're still people. We still care about them. He still cares about these robots. And he starts to look at things and say, this is silly. He recognizes the silliness of his own situation. He recognizes the silliness and says, I don't have to give in to this. I can rise above this and make fun of it because it's the only thing I can do, but damn it, I'm going to do it.
Beautiful. I've thought about that a lot. I've thought about how strange it is that the whole premise of this show is that you should really just relax because it's just a show. But I think when the theme song of the series tells you that the plot doesn't matter, that kind of gives you license to read into it as much as you need to. So you're perfectly able to say, okay, this is dumb. It's super cheesy. I can see Trace's hand as he puppets Crow.
Mhm.
I can tell that it's his voice in, Dr. Forrester and Crow, whatever. You can see all the cracks in the universe. And you can also choose to kind of read into what's going on, like you've just described, and say, wow, this person was really hopeless. He made his friends out of thin air, found genuine connection, and that was what kept him going. I
Mhm.
think that that's not the message that was supposed to be conveyed from this TV show.
Mhm.
I mean, I've talked to Trace and Frank and a bunch of these people about it who made the show, and they're like, "You're reading into this."
Mhm.
And I say, "I know, but that's okay because I'm allowed to because it's
Mhm.
art." And they're like, it's kind of art." And I'm like, "Shut up, it's art."
Yeah, no.
Sometimes I
And
have to
that's,
remind them.
they don't have to have intended. In fact, it's almost better if they didn't intend it, because that keeps them from feeling like they have to accomplish this. They have to make it bigger. It's genuine in what it is in this way. They wanted to make something cute and silly, and when we look at that and we say this is cute and silly, and I kind of need some cute and silly in my life right now.
Right.
If they were trying to make something deep and profound, it wouldn't have actually worked.
No, it would not have been nearly as deep and profound.
No.
Not nearly. Because what they did instead was they created kind of a canvas of silliness for
Hmm.
other people to extract what they need from it
Yeah.
in a very meta emotional kind of way.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I love this show for that reason. It's so dumb, and yet it means everything to me. But it's kind of like how you could say to somebody, "Hey, I'm holding a little piece of lithium carbonate." All it is a salt, right? It's two elements that form a salt crystal. That's silly. You don't really need that. But of course, some people do because lithium is a life-saving drug. Um, Lithium has impact on suicidal thoughts and tendencies. It alleviates them a lot, and I've been taking it for 10 years and I need it, even though it's just a silly little salt crystal. And that's how
Hmm.
I feel about Mystery Science Theater. It's a silly little puppet show, and I need it to save my life.
Now I'm singing the Sodium song in my head, so please pardon me for just a second.
Get through it. You got it.
Okay, okay. But now, I mean, if we take it as that, and I lost my train of thought on that. I'm sorry on that.
No worries. That song gets stuck in your head for sure.
Um, so yeah, but again, it's silly, but it does mean something, and it's smart. That's where I was going to take this next. Is that it's smart because it has references. It's the kind of show that you need to know a lot just to get even half the jokes. You need to think quickly because sometimes what they're talking about is not obvious on the surface of things. It's a show that rewards you for actually thinking, and not enough of our life actually does that.
That was beautiful. I'm going to go back and listen to that again once this podcast is released and just write that down because that's beautiful. It rewards you for thinking about it. I agree. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that dry humor and sarcastic humor, when it's not used to be super mean, I think that it's probably the smartest humor.
I
Um,
can agree with that.
I, and that's more like of a vague and nebulous concept than I would know how to put into words. It just seems like if you can mock something, you understand it.
Hmm.
You can't mock something unless you understand it. So you
True
kind
enough.
of are selecting for people who understand not just old movies, but also the pop culture that goes into making the jokes.
Hmm. And it becomes a little more difficult as the years go on when they're not talking about stuff that's relevant today. For example, you watch a show from season 3, 4, 5, they're talking about things, references of commercials and politics from the early 90s. And at the same time, they might have been talking about stuff that was old then, sitcoms from the 60s. And you have to keep your head in that zone.
Yeah, and that's a big reason why I feel oftentimes like I've been born out of time. Um, I'm definitely more acquainted with the culture of the 90s and before because of this TV show than I am acquainted with pop culture. So when I go watch like a Jonah episode, I hear a lot of references to people whose names I recognize because they're modern,
Hmm.
but it doesn't strike me as being as funny because it just feels like, I don't know, like a cheap shot to take a shot at something modern, that everybody knows just because everybody knows it. Whereas if I'm listening to Frank make Patty Duke jokes, 30 years ago, and Patty Duke being a show that was from like the 50s and 60s, so 30 years before that, I feel, it clicks something in me. It makes me feel more at home. I like those old references better.
It's a little easier to make an older reference when you know what's going to stand the test of time. There's things
Perfect.
that you could reference, My Mother the Car, which is something that only 1/10 of the people could recognize compared to the Patty Duke show. You can. They had shows and politicians and movies and candies and stuff that we don't remember that only lasted for an hour. That stuff did happen, but we didn't write jokes about it years later. When Jonah makes the reference to something that's going on today, that might be something that's just forgotten about.
Exactly.
By this time next year. And they don't have the advantage of knowing that, so you can't hold it against them.
Right. And I don't. I absolutely don't. They're just doing what they've always done, except that when they did it before, in the original series, those episodes aged. And so the funniest jokes just stayed in people's consciousness because they related to pop culture topics that stood the test of time, just like you said.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think that the references that they make in the original episodes that are like really, really buried and really obscure, those are the most fun to go research. And then you can pull that out of your pocket when you're talking to your friends and be like, hey, here's a reference to something you've never heard of, because the only person who's heard of it is Frank Conniff, and I heard it from him. And you just feel kind of special that way. It's kind of a jerk move, but I like to do it occasionally.
Every once in a while, you just got to do that.
Yep. That's part of what makes this show kind of a cult following.
That and the fact that, I had Rebecca Hansen on a couple episodes earlier, and we kind of had to make the observation that it's not a show that people even know how to watch the first time they see it, because the reaction they get is, I can't hear over their talking. Why are they stupid robot? Why can't they shut up so I can hear the movie? And that's sensible. That's the way you watch every other movie you've ever watched in your life. So you have to convince people to stop watching the movie and start watching the interaction of the people to the movie. And it takes a cult mentality to do that.
Yeah, that dual attention is tough. You're watching the movie because you need it in order to understand the jokes. It's a symbiotic relationship. And that's not easy to do. It takes practice. Just like you said, it's like not something that you know how to do the first time intuitively, that you see an episode, but you do learn. And it takes listening skills, and it takes attention. It just takes a lot of things that not everybody really has necessarily. The ability to pay attention to two things happening at once and understand both of those things separately and together. Yeah.
And it's not the kind of thing that you can do while you're folding the laundry or washing the dishes or something like that. It takes your attention. It's not a show that lends itself to putting it on in the background.
Not if you're going to be paying attention to the jokes, yeah. Like I said earlier, I think it's good as a comforting sort of white noise if you're going to tune it out. And in that sense, it's a good background show. I know a lot of people who watch it just to fall asleep at night, because they can kind of tune their attention away from the jokes. But if you want a joke to land, yeah, you got to tune in. Absolutely.
Speaking of jokes landing, there's something that has always been a little bit of a sticking point with me about the show, and you're about the only person I could actually try to see if you feel the same way.
Shoot.
This is something that they did, and it actually lasted probably longer than it should, but they would have situations where they would make a sketch about something in the movie, and they would place the sketch before that actually occurred in the movie.
Yes.
That happened way more often than we realize, and has it ever really bugged you?
It didn't bug me in the sense that it irritated me or anything. I definitely noticed it. I think that the show is so just overwhelmingly full of broken fourth walls that type of thing doesn't really stand out as being like, oh, continuity error, because the whole show is a continuity error. You know,
Yeah,
so I can't say it bothered me.
that's a really good point. And it also seems like it's built into the show that you're going to watch it out of order and you're probably going to rewatch it many times over, which most shows don't actually have that confidence in the viewer.
Is it confidence in the viewer, or is it just apathy? Like, are they saying, we trust that our fans will be able to watch this show in any order they want? Or are they just saying, we're just going to do whatever the hell we want and the right people will get it?
I'm not sure I can answer that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thought.
Definitely worth pursuing. I'm glad I brought it up there.
Yeah. I definitely noticed they would do that what you mentioned about doing a sketch from the movie before that had happened in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really charming, honestly, because it kind of reminds you that the people who were writing these sketches and performing them are the same people who watched this movie 8 times to write 750 to 850 jokes about it.
Mm-hmm.
It makes the whole communal aspect of the show feel very, very strong for me. Because it reminds me that the people I'm watching act out these sketches are the people who wrote the sketches. They're the people who watched the movies. I really appreciate that.
There are moments when you can just sense that after watching the movie so many times, they got so passionate and not passionate necessarily in a good way about something that was just so frustrating or stupid, and they just had to get it out somehow. And there were moments where it's like, this joke has to go in the show, and this is the hill I'm going to die on.
There are some moments like that. I love that too. I love picking out the jokes that the silhouettes deliver,
Mm-hmm.
and then trying to determine like, oh, I bet Mike wrote that joke, but I see why they gave it to Servo.
Mm-hmm.
You know, trying to match the personality with the joke writer and then the joke deliverer.
Mm-hmm.
Is a lot of fun once you get to know the people well enough.
Yeah, and you can definitely see when they try to, how should I say this? You can definitely set when certain writers come in and leave. You can see they bring in their own influence. For instance, jokes about politics tended to downplay quite a bit after Frank left.
Yeah.
When they brought in Mary Jo, I think it was season 3.
4?
3? Okay.
It's 4. It's okay.
Okay. Yeah, you can definitely see there were a lot more jokes about, for example, Audrey Hepburn's hat. That's a joke that you can hear that coming right out of her mouth.
Exactly, and I think that was the first joke, the first riff she ever wrote for the series.
It was.
And that was in Teenagers from Outer Space, which is still my favorite episode because it was my first one.
It's one of my favorites too, so I definitely think it started off on the right foot there.
I think so. I think it was perfect.
So you get to be on the road with these guys. How does that come about, and how does that feel as a fan?
I'm still struggling to express it in words. It was a dream of mine for a really long time, specifically for me because growing up with borderline personality disorder, there's a lot of reality confusion that can happen in the brain of somebody who has that disorder like me. And so you look at a character on TV and you say, wait, that character's animated, therefore they're not real. But this character over here, that's a real person, except it's actually just an actor playing a character that's not real. And you can see how the whole concept of TV gets really confusing to somebody who has a very tenuous grasp on reality anyway, like I did when I was really young. So the fact that I was able to watch Mystery Science Theater, look at the actors on the screen and say, okay, those are real people playing fake people, except those fake people, those characters that they're playing are actually pretty true to who the actors are in many ways. And then to actually meet them and see that I was right. I finally got reality right. You know, I saw that these were real people and then I met them and they were real. I was right. Very, very, very rewarding.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, and I definitely want to start looking at that a little more. So you have somebody like Trace,
Sure,
very sweet guy, but is in no way the evil mad scientist, the sadistic blowhard. But then you have Joel and Mike, who aren't exactly like their counterparts on the show, but definitely in the ballpark. They're only a few degrees off from their characters. Was that difficult or easy for you to process?
It kind of depends on the scenario. I mean, I guess it's easy to process when the actor is slightly different from the character. It's a little bit harder when the actor is different in a way that I maybe am not as big a fan of.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody has flaws, and when you get to
Sure.
know somebody as well as I've gotten to know these guys,
Mm-hmm.
like, you do see their flaws.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to think, oh, well, such and such character wouldn't have said that, or they wouldn't have felt that way. Absolutely. It's a huge challenge for anybody. There have been hiccups in my relationships with the guys, as you would expect with any friend that you have for multiple years. But for the most part, it's been an incredibly rewarding fandom to be a part of. I can't really say anything bad about it. It's been kind of a spiritual guide to know that the people who made me laugh when I needed it the most are now friends of mine and care about me. And it's been a source of joy for years. So I can't say that, the hiccups that I get with my heroes, interacting with them, I can't say that that's really a huge negative thing. It's a surface level thing.
Fair enough. Somebody asked me as I started doing the show if I'd ever met somebody in a con or in fandom and really been taken back by the fact that they were not a great person or not who I thought they were. And I just said, look, I'm very cognizant of the fact that anybody I follow is a human being. So when I meet them and find out that they are, in fact, a human being, it's not a huge adjustment for me. It might be a small one, but it's not a big one.
Yeah, it may be a disappointment, but it's not life-changing.
No.
You can know that people are human, and then you can hope that they're amazing in every way. And when you meet them and they're not amazing in every way, that's a disappointment, but they're still human.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And regardless of what you find out, the talent they brought to it and the fact they put on this great performance, you can never take that away from them. What somebody does as a matter of art is that art is always there. That is eternal.
The art is always there, and the impact is always there.
Exactly.
When I saw Cinematic Titanic live in San Francisco, was it really 7 years ago? Holy cow. I was in high school at the time, but I brought along this drawing that I had made of Joel. I had made it when I first found the show at the age of 15, and I was so proud of it. It's still one of the best pieces of art I've ever produced. And I had nightmares for a long time leading up to that experience, thinking this print of mine, it's not a print, it's the original, it's going to get damaged, or I'm going to ask him to sign it, and he's going to like scribble all over his own face. No, I don't know why he would do that. I was just really scared that that's something that might happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I finally got through that autograph line to the very end where he was sitting, and I pulled out that drawing, and I told him basically that I was nervous about letting somebody else put ink down, even him. And he said, okay, show me where you want me to sign. And so I knelt down behind the booth and I pointed to the corner, and he signed so perfectly. He made the edges of the letters of his name line up with some of the edges of the shapes in the drawing. It's just perfect. And I was so taken away by that moment that I decided to get that exact tattoo. See if I can show it here. It's not super easy here.
I can catch it. Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah, it's a copy of what he put on my drawing.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I'm relating this back to what you just said, what they've done for us, the art that they've created for themselves, and the takeaway that we've had from it, that's not going anywhere. That can't change.
No.
It'll never be the 90s again, which is sad, but also beautiful, because it means that everything that happened is really set in stone, and we can rely on those memories.
Mm-hmm. And just as we were saying earlier, that, it's deep and profound because they didn't try to make it deep and profound. They made something genuinely cute that we now look back on and say, okay, there's more to this than it's more than the sum of its parts. People that we're getting to know are also more than the sum of their parts. If they're grouchy before they have their coffee, or if they forget to pick you up when they say they will, they're still great people. We don't have to be perfect to be good.
You sound like my therapist, and she is a smart lady. I agree with that totally. I never signed on to this fandom in the hopes that my heroes would be perfect. I signed on to this fandom in the hopes that they would be good enough. And they always have been. They've always been people, and that's all I wanted from them.
And they deliver that in spades for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sometimes they're puppets, but mostly they're people.
Yeah, but
Oh, no, I was just interviewed as a one-off by the Damn Dirty Revival, I don't know what they call themselves anymore. Damn Dirty Geeks podcast, previously the Revival League podcast.
Okay.
They're Denver-based Misties.
I know them.
Yeah. And there's some people within that group who donated so many thousands of dollars to the Kickstarter to rebuild MST3K on Netflix that they got to be kind of honorary associate directors and producers of the show.
Very cool.
Yeah, they were flown out to LA to watch them make the show. And they're just based in Denver, which is like an hour from me. It's pretty cool.
It's very cool. I get to Denver every now and then. Not as often as I'd like and not for as long as I'd like.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place, but I'm having a hard time living where I grew up, so soon I'll be out of here.
Where are you headed?
Minneapolis.
The Holy Land, of course.
Why
did I think
Land.
anything else?
I didn't think anything else. That's the thing. I knew I wanted to get out of Boulder. This is a really small town, and, I've been here since I was a kid. I want to see other stuff. And every city is equally foreign, except for, well, I guess two if you count St. Paul, except for the Twin Cities. They feel very much like home. I know the accent. I know the geography. I know the hot dish. Just from watching Mystery Science Theater, I feel very familiar with all that stuff. So when I went there, and I actually just got back from that trip yesterday, everything about the place felt really like home, even though I'd barely been there before.
See that? And me personally, I've only been there. I was stranded there for a night, and that's the extent of my familiarity with the place. But I mean, it was a wonderful city from the brief that I saw of it. And if it made our own favorite show, that can't be all bad.
No, a lot of the environment of Minneapolis and St. Paul have really contributed to the feeling of the show. The show kind of makes you feel like you're at home and it's snowing outside and you're kind of trapped in, and you've got soup and casserole and tea, and then maybe there's a fireplace. I don't know. This is just me giving an image to the feeling I get when I watch Mystery Science Theater. And that's kind of what it is to live in Minnesota. You're trapped inside because of the snowdrifts and the freezing cold temperatures, the sub-zero temperatures, in fact. And you feel cozy.
And that's everything you just said is true. I completely agree with everything. I'm going to piggyback off of that for a second and say that it's not just the feeling of the show, but the mindset that went into it. MST3K was one of the few shows, especially of its time, that wasn't designed in Los Angeles or New York. You can tell a show that's written in those places because they're written with the corporate studio mindset, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but you don't get the flavor of somebody who's sitting in Minneapolis saying, man, what if I could make a TV show, what would it be like?
And then they don't worry too much about the details.
No.
They just do it. Everybody says, especially to artists and writers and stuff like that, people say, don't think about your project, just make it, just start. Things will happen, you'll deal with them, but at least you started your project, and that means you can finish. If you just think about it, you'll never finish. And so Joel, in like 87, had this idea that had been kind of growing in his mind for couple decades at that point, for a TV show. And he said, wait, I have a hangar space in Minneapolis. I know this guy, Jim Mellon. He is president of the local station, and maybe I'll just make this show in my garage overnight. And he did, and it was awesome. And the fact that they didn't care if it was perfectly, smooth or rounded at the corners, that made it what it is, and that made it amazing.
And I mean, I'm feeling his growing pains now a little bit doing this show, because I'll be honest with you, it is not on a technical level what I want it to be. I really wish I could talk to people in person instead of over Skype, but you know what? It's getting done. Every episode is a little bit better than the last, and I'm really, really proud of it, because I'm getting to talk to people like you. I'm getting to share your story with the people that we care about, the fans at large, who don't get to necessarily do this. And stories like yours need to be told. Stories like Jackie's need to be told. And I want to be able to show the people that we look to, the writers and actors and directors, and get them to show us the stuff that they don't get to show us on any other medium. So when Joel's putting something together in his garage 30 plus years ago, I feel for him, but I'm glad he did it.
You can't know until you start
No.
where you're going to end up. And the only way you know where you'll end up is if you don't start, because you're going to end up with nothing. So I think that as long as the content of what you're doing is amazing, and by amazing, I mean just genuine, you're going to have a good product, and people are going to want to listen to it. People are going to want to watch it, whatever it is. In my case, I hope they read it.
Definitely. So when are you going to start this book? And if you don't want to tell me, that's fine. But do you have a plan, an agenda, or even an outline?
I have a start. I have some steps in the beginning. I have, first of all, the very first step for me is asking for permission from everybody who was like a major player in the show. I don't want to go about writing down the history of their art without their permission. And it doesn't have to be legal or like a real endorsement. It can just be, hey, Trace, do you mind? And he says, no, go ahead. That's all I need. So that's the first step. I've gotten permission from most of the cast. Some of the cast are more difficult to get in touch with, and that's the only reason I haven't heard from them. But apart from that, I want to do kind of a bit of a biography aspect of each of the people who made the show. So in that case, that dates back all the way to like mid-50s through present. I want to get fan feedback. I want to incorporate their personalities. I want to do exclusive interviews. I'd love to make a documentary based on this someday. I have ideas. They're just not plans yet.
When you say documentary, and pardon me if I get presumptuous, but I just, fan to fan, I have to say this. I really see you almost making a sequel to the This Is MST3K special from the mid-90s, with Doogie Howser, of all people, trying to introduce what he thinks of the show. You could do that for this generation, but do it better.
I want to. And I want Neil Patrick Harris to be a part of it, because I adore him. And he's also in season 11, so that's kind of a crazy closure there. I want to take everything that's happened since that first documentary was made in 92, and I want to incorporate it into an even broader picture. And then maybe in another 30 years, when even more stuff has happened, I can make a sequel or an extended version or something. But this is a story that's still being written. Yeah, and it needs to be updated.
Absolutely. MST3K has started and stopped so many times that at any point it could have easily been dead to rights. I mean, when it could have ended in season 5, it didn't. They did end it in season 7, it came back. They ended after season 10, it came back. It's dead now. I'm not counting it out.
No.
And I've said several times, I'm not going to offer any suggestions as to how it's coming back, because I don't want to jinx anything. But I have my theories and I have my hopes, and that's all I'm going to say.
I think having hopes is perfectly reasonable given what Joel has said about how he wants to keep moving it around platforms. He doesn't want it to die ever. I think that's perfectly feasible. And I think that when he gets back from this tour in, 6 years or however, he's just on the road forever, then he'll have more time to kind of devote some thought to it. But that's just my theory.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not suggesting anybody but Joel really knows where it could go, but
Yeah.
I have confidence in him, is all I'm going to say.
I have confidence in him too, and I don't think anybody really knows where Joel's going except for Joel, ever.
Having only met him at Cinematic Titanic, I can just tell he is one of those people that he's innovative beyond measure. I mean, the show itself was innovative. The formats he recreated were innovative. Just the idea that actually it was more of a variety show with a movie as a background. And the guy that was looking at Kukla, Fran, and Ollie from the early 60s and translated that into this, I mean, I look at that and I'm just in awe. Because so much of that is just stuff that, how can you take a silly kid show and actually make genius out of it?
What he did was he created a crucible of ideas, too. Elton John, Silent Running, all these old monster movies, and the inventions that he made when he was a kid. He took aspects of media and aspects of his life, and he threw them into a big pot, gave it a little bit of structure, and called it Mystery Science Theater. Yeah. And I love that. At a certain point, it can be argued that nothing is original because everything is inspired by something else. With Joel's creations, you can see all of those different aspects inspiring him, and he also creates something really unique, which is wonderful. Like he did the TV wheel, which is a concept that, I don't know, I wish it would have taken off. I thought it was a really interesting concept to put one solitary camera in front of a large, like 32-foot spinning wheel, so that the cameras don't move, but the sets do. That's just cool. It's like, why not turn the concept upside down? And I love that he is just willing to pitch this to whoever opportunistically walks by, who can lend him money or a studio. I think that's really inspiring.
Yeah, and to put everything you have into something, and if it doesn't pan out, which is unfortunate, but you did it. You gave it everything you had. You created something, and that's more than 99% of people do.
Exactly. He got started. And I think it's also really great. Where was I going with that train of thought? Oh, yeah. I read it in an interview somewhere at some point. He said that he wanted to be known as the guy who creates lots of different things. But then he realized he could just be the guy who's known for creating Mystery Science Theater. And that was kind of the turning point where he went back to making the show, and that's what we ended up with season 11 and 12.
And when Joel left the show in season 5 and Mike came on, and people would argue over whether it was good or bad, you could just see to me that Joel was the creator. He was the inventor, and he had the invention exchange was a Joel-ism for sure, which is why it kind of went away after, shortly after Mike came on. And Mike was a maintenance man, which wasn't a bad thing. That was actually genius, because he was the one who took what Joel made and kept it running, and I would argue made it better. But their roles were perfectly compatible. They were perfectly complementary. Joel and Mike really were two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, one was the father and one was the brother.
Yeah. And
I think.
Go ahead. Please go.
Mike created a lot of the meat of the show. His sense of humor was like the content. That was the comedy content of the show. Joel's sense of humor, I think I would say that I personally prefer Mike's in terms of just who can make me laugh out loud more often. But it's Joel's creativity that built the framework that Mike then filled in. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's when Joel did that. I mean, you could definitely tell, at least at first, he was motivated because he couldn't invent anymore on the show. He wanted to invent, and I respect that. When he went off, he did the TV wheel. He made the Gizmonics website. He tried a couple of different things. Eventually started Cinematic Titanic, which was MST3K adjacent, and then just said, "Hey, I'm just going to do MST3K again." He came full circle creatively, and I mean, I think he just had to do that, and I'm happy he's happy.
I'm also happy he's happy. You know, you don't hear that a lot in fandom.
No,
You hear, you know, I wish my creators would do whatever the hell I want them to do, but you don't hear, you know, they're doing what they want and I'm happy that they're happy.
yeah. If he had wanted to walk away and never come back to it, I would have been okay with that too. I'd hope that somebody could do it, but if he doesn't want to do it, I don't want to make him. I'm glad he
No.
does.
Yeah, and a huge part of the charm of the original show was that nobody was making these guys do anything. They were purely choosing to do it themselves.
Hmm.
Um, I know that Trace was getting paid something like $25 a week when they started at KTMA and the Comedy Channel.
Hmm.
Um, Nothing was motivating these guys more than their own internal sense of wanting to be funny and create something. Um, so I don't think that forcing anybody to make Mystery Science Theater would actually make Mystery Science Theater. It would make kind of a shell. It wouldn't be funny. It wouldn't be wholesome anymore.
No, agreed.
But lots of people have branched off too,
Hmm.
which is really cool. Like ICWXP, um, and then like Doug Benson had that Benson Interruption show that was kind of very reminiscent of MST3K. Um, and you can even say that RiffTrax and Film Crew kind of branched off from Mystery Science Theater, even though it was actually those same guys.
Love those.
Love those. Yeah.
I was a huge fan of the Film Crew concept. I'm kind of bummed that it didn't take off further. RiffTrax is just as good, but Film Crew kind of had that MST3K light type of feel to it, which when there was no MST3K was very special to me.
Right. Yes. And I also noticed that Cinematic Titanic had a similar timeline. At the
Hmm.
very beginning of their DVD releases, which they filmed in a studio,
Hmm.
they would do sketches. And they
Hmm.
would play with the silhouette style. They would have props come down from the ceiling and TARDISes and chandeliers and stuff like that. But what I noticed happening is the same thing that kind of happened at Film Crew,
Hmm.
which is that those sketches weren't that funny.
Hmm.
I hate to say that. I mean, I really
No,
do.
um, it was Rebecca Hansen and I were talking about exactly this, and she is really into improv, as I'm sure you know. It's one of her main talents is to just get on stage with absolutely no material and just knock it out of the park. So a live audience is something that she relates to very, very well. And we were talking about how the original cinematic Titanic shows were very studio oriented, high production values. The later ones, they were trying to take the live shows and copy them into a DVD format. And we both agreed that while that was admirable, it didn't work because you can't take the live experience and just put it in a bottle.
Right. And you know, today I was driving around listening to a live album. It was a live performance of one of my favorite studio albums, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. I feel the energy of the audience. But when it's comedy, it's a little different than music.
Hmm.
Music, like you're really tuned into what you're hearing. But for me, comedy is more about the community. So the point of going to a live show at a comedy show is to connect with the people who are there. And if you can't do that, then the DVD releases, it kind of defeats the purpose a little bit.
Hmm. I'm glad it's there because
Yeah.
I'm one of those people that I like to have everything preserved for the future because, 'cause I spent so much of my early childhood and my teen years in the VHS era when if you didn't record it, it was gone forever. There were so many of my shows that's like, I might never see this again, so I obsessively hoarded tapes of recorded stuff. Um, when DVD came around, that was the unofficial launch of DVD was like 96. I think it actually hit mainstream like 98. I was 17. I had lived almost 2 decades thinking I have to record this or it's gone forever. That I'm thinking you kind of grew up in the age when you could probably get any show you wanted for $20.
By the time I was old enough to appreciate media,
Yeah.
yeah, there was Blockbuster and then Redbox. So yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And yeah, so it's like even if it's not a perfect experience, I want to have it because, I don't want to not be able to show it to my kid one day.
Right. And there's also just a lot of street cred to be gained from having stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have multiple copies of several cinematic Titanics,
Mm-hmm.
and they're on DVD. They're the nice cover and everything, and I don't have any reason. I don't even have a way to play them. I don't have a way to play any DVD, let alone two of the same. So, I don't know why I keep them. It's kind of that hoarding collector's mentality. It's Mystery Science Theater related. Joel's in it. My friends are in it. I have to have it.
Totally understandable.
Yeah.
So, do you have the PlayStation Underground CD?
No. What is that?
Okay. PlayStation Underground was a CD-based magazine from the mid-90s when the PlayStation was new. It was literally a game, but you would put it in, it only played on the PlayStation. And there was one issue, which was like the only one that was ever worth money, where they got the crew together to riff PlayStation commercials. And I'm sure somebody's put this on YouTube, but
What year was this?
this was like 96,
Okay.
97.
Okay.
But yeah, there's look up PlayStation Underground MST3K and it'll get you all the details. But yeah, this is like really, really hard to find, and I don't even have a copy of it. So that tells you anything.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So while we're wrapping on that, where can people keep in touch with you on all your misadventures?
My misadventures are logged in terrifying detail in Twitter at Ms. Misery. Or you know what? Just look at my full name, Zoe Plait. My handle's too hard to describe.
Sure.
My blog is called Miss Misery. I chronicle the misadventures of having depression and borderline personality disorder, as well as the weird, poignant ways that those relate to Mystery Science Theater. And that's really about it. I don't have a Tumblr anymore. Not since high school.
Well, I'm going to make sure all of that and everything we talked about gets put into our show notes at my website, aaronbosick.com. And I definitely want to have you back because I don't think we're done with this conversation.
I don't think so either. I don't think this conversation can be done.
No.
Completed, no.
So we'll be talking about that, and I will be glad to have you back on real soon. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Aaron.